All right. No one has been joining or asking to join in more than 2 minutes. So I would say let's get started. I did not prepare anything because the questions that came up are not necessary, don't need so much of a preparation. Do we have any specific questions here that are urgently to be asked, or should I start with the ones that we've seen? Lawrence, you were unmuting. Okay, in that case, watch me go awkwardly through the mirror board, which I'm not very used to. Generally speaking, we have received questions, and please interrupt me at any time if you have follow-up questions on basically 3 different areas. One is the tech stack itself that we have and why we deployed that, the plans that we have technically as well as non-technically. And then there's a few more generally tech questions, tech related. Some I need some background actually, because I don't quite get what the question is about. But let's start at I would start at the tech stack. There we have an obvious one that came up is why are we building on top of Matrix? So in case you're not familiar with Matrix, a really quick rundown is it's a decentralized messaging protocol and foundation. So there's a foundation that is continuing to build on the protocol. Decentralized in this case means something similar to email. So if you know an email account, you have that with, I don't know, gmail.com or mailbox.org or something. And then you have your username there, and you give stuff to the server, and the server then talks to other servers to submit your message, which in particular means the message is going to be on your server as well as on the receiving end of the server. Now, matrix.org moved that forward into the realm of instant messaging. So the idea of having chat rooms with multiple participants and messages within that that are then across different servers. And one other aspect that was, so the core idea when it started out in 2012, 2014 was that we have Slack, we have IRC, we have all of these things coming up that again are silos in themselves. And you can't talk from Slack to someone on Teams, for example. And Matrix is a protocol that allows everyone to connect all of these different streams. While at the same time, it has a very strong focus on privacy as well as data encryption. So it offers various standards on how to encrypt data, end-to-end encrypt data, so that even the service in between can't really deal with that. And more than just the primitives or like what kind of algorithms to use or how to use that specific algorithms, it has all of these patterns around that. Like you have multiple devices, each one has their own encryption key. How do you make sure that the phone can decrypt something that your laptop can decrypt, and so forth. That has been in the making for not exactly, but almost a decade now. And it's pretty mature at this point. The reason we're building on top of Matrix is that essentially what it is per room that you have is just a stream of messages. And these messages have in the last few years received more than just specific normal, like this is a message kind of things, but also stuff like I can reply to something else, or I can edit a message. I send a message that alters an earlier message. Sorry, Abdulaziz, do you want to?
No.
Okay.
I just meant, yeah.
Okay, no worries. And so the thing that we want is end-to-end encrypted end-to-end encrypted communication for people and want to end-to-end encrypt all of the data as well. Like not only the messages themselves, but if you have a to-do list that you manage, you want to have that end-to-end encrypted. And quite honestly, other than we put that on a server somewhere that is like the cloud is someone else's server, right? That is most of the time not encrypted, unless you're talking about these very specific use case of password managers where data is encrypted on the server. Data isn't encrypted, which makes it vulnerable. If you're managing your project, your, I don't know, protest, potentially illegal protest in the country that you are. Abdulus, yes?
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Are you single?
No.
Julius, are you? Julius.
Thank you. That is not very helpful.
How old are you?
Removed.
Can we remove? Okay.
So coming back to the actual topic. And so we want this to be end-to-end encrypted, and Matrix offers most of these paradigms and ideas already for us that we can build upon to build these state machines for to-do lists and other objects, offering actually end-to-end encrypted more than just messaging, which is just like message to message, but actually build on top of that. And it offers a lot of features for that, not only Matrix.org as a specification, but in particular, the Matrix Rust SDK that we're using basically does a lot of that heavy lifting of end-to-end encryption, making sure that we can offer easy access to register another device as a device that belongs to you, and so forth. So all of that usability around that, basically we can piggyback on. And that allows us to move a lot further, a lot quicker than if we were to start building all of that by ourselves. Any follow-up questions to why we're building on top of Matrix? So the question is whether everything is encrypted by default. No, Matrix as a specification does not make everything encrypted by default. The reason behind that is that as soon as you bridge into another system like Teams or even Signal or something, in order to be able to send that message within the network, you would have to decrypt it and encrypt it again afterwards. So the system itself is only about how do you move the messages between these servers. And then the second part, it offers paradigms and a specification for clients to then decrypt that information. But it depends on whether the client implements that. So you can send unencrypted information on channels. You can enforce that you do not send unencrypted information ever on your client side, but you cannot force everyone to always send encrypted data. A very common use case for that is that you might want to have bots who don't have any encryption, so they can't decrypt your messages, but they can send messages into a room to get you an information. So not everything is encrypted by default on Matrix. In the first alpha, we are not going to have everything encrypted either, because the encryption system is still complex to get right. A very common case is that you change the keys throughout the time that the encryption keys that you are in a room. And that rotation means that we need to properly update that for the entire history. Otherwise, we can't read the history. That's a still, let's say, fragile part in the entire system, and making sure that you can read all the messages because you have received all of the keys is a fundamental problem. So the alpha is not going to have everything encrypted by default. But if you opt into using spaces that are encrypted, stuff on there will be encrypted. It might just that you miss messages if stuff is not. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does.
So Tala is asking, what's the state of VoIP integration using the Matrix protocol? It is still optimized to the stage where we can seamlessly manage audio-video communication while keeping up the quality and performance aspects. ICE Element has done it, but in an okay state. So the current integration so VoIP, I assume you mean just voice in general over the Matrix protocol. In its current state, as it is specified as part of the full spec, uses WebRTC as the data channel, which uses a server in between, but is a direct connection between you and another client. So it's a full peer-to-peer connection that has the annoying drawback that effectively most clients cannot hold more than 8 connections at a time. So the peer-to-peer version of this has limitations. That is, however, because the client receives the video and audio and can manage it fully themselves, end-to-end encrypted as well. So it's using the keys from the room and establish a secure channel through WebRTC through these other pairs. And that is pretty nice. But again, also means there's more CPU usage, which leads to effectively, if you want to have more than 6 participants, it's going to be tricky. So the way that Element currently manages video chats most of the time is through a Jitsi server that is an embedded widget, which is of course not the gold standard. But there is a project from Element that is working on exactly that. The specification for that is more complex. So like when I say exactly that, I mean that you have one video stream that you send to the server, and it bundles multiple streams to different clients, even to the point that you can say, like, look, I'm currently only looking at 4 people here. Don't give me the video of other people, so you can optimize what Zoom and other clients are doing already. However, as soon as you say this is end-to-end encrypted, rescaling and similar stuff is of course not plausibly possible at the moment. There's some algorithms that offer something like that, but to the big part, it's not possible. But the main benefit of that next iteration, which is not yet fully part of the specification, is that it will be one channel to the server, one channel coming back, and that is then giving you different streams of different selections, which is what modern clients do. I know that Element has a strong push to get something like this done. I'm not sure, but I think they have clients with a lot of money that want to use it. So there's a good chance that they will. However, that will not be fully peer-to-peer. That will always require like big chunky servers to do the routing. Daniel's asking who or what uses Matrix at the moment. So Matrix has a few. So if you go to matrix.org, you can follow up on the details. I know that the UK Department of Defense is using it. So specifically Element in a specific form. The French Defense Ministry is using it. There is a project in German healthcare to do messaging between doctors as well as doctors and patients through an end-to-end encrypted Matrix client. Of course, because it is an open source protocol, anybody can use it. We don't know about all use cases. The strongest user group is probably in the open source community. So a lot of former IRC, so Internet Relay Chat on Freenet and others moved to Matrix. So Mozilla and others use that as internal chat as well. There's a bunch of companies. The one nice thing about this is you can use it as an internal chat and you can bridge out of it, right? Like earlier this morning for me, earlier today, I chatted with someone who's on the Mozilla service and using that as the Mozilla chat, for example, from our chat room over here. So there's a wide variety, primarily, although it is for chat usage, I guess. Any other follow-up questions on this? You can, by the way, also unmute yourself and ask the question directly. I don't have to repeat that. And it's not a monologue by me if you do that. So I appreciate if you did. Nope. Okay, then let's go into the lower area of the stack. Why did we pick Rust and Flutter to build Actor? So if you're not familiar, so Rust is a low-level language on the range of C, C++, if you heard of that, which is a systems language, which means it's very good for building libraries and network, closed network, high performance stuff, which is very good for encryption stuff, because encryption stuff on higher layers is always consuming a lot of memory and consuming a lot of CPU. And that is a lot more optimized. It's also very famous for being particular safe. So C and C++ very often have memory issues and have various bugs that can be exploited. Very famously, the latest version of Android, now a third of new code that Google added to that is Rust, and they've seen a specific type of bug, which is segfaults, drop by 2/3, just because they replaced it with this safer language. I've been working on this language for a couple of years now. In 2015 or something, I've co-hosted the first Rust Fest in Berlin. It had a large famous stint with crypto and blockchains over the last couple of years, because it's easy to build pretty safe code quite quickly. And it has a very large community that allows to do that. One particular reason this is interesting for us is because the Element, the biggest company in Matrix, is using the Rust Matrix SDK as the core backend for all of their next generation applications, which means that there's a lot of work going towards the Matrix Rust SDK, which is also what we're using to build on top of. And that's simply work we don't have to do. Again, similar to using Matrix as a baseline for work that we don't have to do, which allows us to build all of these features a lot quicker than if we didn't have that. And the same reason is basically true for Flutter. Flutter is a UI framework or front end for building applications, UI applications, primarily for mobile. So it came out of the mobile world. It's also out there for a couple of years now, pushed by Google to build applications that are then compiled to a almost native framework. All of the UI stuff that Google does, for example, Material.io, which is a design library, are very often built into Flutter directly. And Flutter and Rust, both of them offer a wide range of targets to build your code once, to write your code once, and then build it for these various platforms. So thanks to Flutter, we can offer the same application for Android, iOS, Linux, Windows, and Mac at the moment, because we are using these two platforms that allow us to not have to write a lot of platform-specific code. If we had to build the same with the native equivalents, we would need 10 times as many people as we currently have, just because you need the experts on each platform. So that's why we picked both of these things. It allows us to work faster, quicker, and they are an okay trade-off in terms of performance that you always sacrifice by not going super special compared to portability and having fewer people to actually work on this. Any follow-up questions on Rust or Flutter at this point?
Maybe, yeah, can I ask again, like, maybe just unmute. There we go. Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes, just sort of like the argument for, like, so when others kind of like ask into how are we able to in some way build an application that can challenge you know, some of the other very established players, and one of the arguments that because we use these frameworks like Flutter and Rust, can you just like summarize again, like what is it? Is it because like a lot of these are already kind of like pre-built things that we can almost use as modules, and we don't have to build them from scratch? Is that like kind of the right answer to frame it that way?
Yes, and they are both more modern. So if you look at Signal or other systems, so Signal itself is also using Rust now for its core encryption stuff. So these languages came about, or these both Rust is a language, Flutter is a framework based on the Dart language. They're pretty young, so they come with all of that experience of having multiple platforms. Like, we're not living in a world where there's only one platform anymore. Like, Windows used to be the major platform, but now we have iOS, we have Mac, we have all of these very common ecosystem of platforms, and both of these have been built after this has been established. So they target that directly. Flutter is meant to be a cross-platform framework. Rust is meant to be a cross-platform language. They have built that in, and the communities around that, and that is the other part you're talking about, are building exactly for that. So for Flutter, for example, if you go to pub.dev, which is the package repository, you can always see like it's implemented for all of these platforms. It's web, it's iOS, it's Android. There's of course always specific stuff because you have APIs only on specific platforms. But for most of the things, you will find someone's like, oh, this is awesome. I also want this in my Windows app. So they build the part that is missing for the Windows app. And then you have a thing that you can just drop in, and it works for almost all platforms. So
okay, great.
The summary is like we're using modern tooling that has been built after for exactly these circumstances, and therefore it's optimized for that scenario and has a community that optimizes for that scenario. Milton is asking, what is your plan regarding adoption of Sync v3 and the impact on the product? So Sync v3 is a new generation of synchronization for Matrix. It's currently being spec'd, and it's going to be the next generation for the Rust SDK and all of the Element clients. The current plan is, so our server supported. We have the proxy set up. Our current plan is to stick with v2 because we have other features that we first have to finish up. But the plan is to move to v3 as soon as possible, because we're currently splitting up all the actor specific things into spaces that definitely have a different behavior than a chat room. Like a chat room, it's more important to see the last couple of messages. So loading them first is the most important thing. But for a to-do list, we need to know when it was created, when it was changed, and the order in which it's changed. So we have a linear progression. Which currently means that when we do the regular sync, we only get the last chunk, depending on what the server is configured. And that then we have to follow up, like read up the entire history. In Sync v3, we can already reduce a lot of the overhead that we have at the beginning through that new mechanism. And so we're very excited to see that happening. However, right now we are, after a first sync, filter out, okay, these are the spaces we need to linearly sync up, and these are just message spaces, which is fine enough, but probably going to be terrible if you have 5,000 rooms or something. So it's like multiple minutes. The alpha is probably not going to have v3. I definitely want that before the end of the year. That seems to answer the question, which is already one of the planning questions, but I'm going to continue moving on. Self-hosting actor as the home server. First, yes, of course, that's the entire idea, is that right now, as it stands, you don't need any particular, it should work with any matrix server asterisk, because you need specific RFCs to MSCs, which is the metric specification process, that are not fully spec yet to be activated for it to work the most efficient way. We already have on the docs.actor.global, we're already explaining which kind of features need to be activated for that to work nicely as your home server. So the default home server should work, but it might be slower. And there's certain features and certain ideas that we have in the plan to implement that might require other actors on the home server. For example, one thing that is not going to be in the alpha, but it's going to be soon after, is that we need more profile information, and the metric specification currently doesn't offer a coherent way of doing that. There's a few MSCs out there, but all of them are like slightly incomplete. So our approach is we will add another endpoint through a plugin in the Synapse server that allows users to change, I don't know, time zone and that sort of stuff, and allow users to read that information out in a very simplified manner. Of course, the idea in the end is to offer, to go whatever the MSC comes, like the metric specification comes up with, but currently it doesn't seem like a coherent idea is coming up. But also in this case, for at least the basic stuff, we want to stick with existing home servers. We don't want to have a fork of Synapse or something that you need to have. We want this to be as spec compliant as possible. If other things are needed, they will be provided as well as something that you can use and install. So self-hosting actor should always be possible. That said, actor in that entire system is more the client than the server. So self-hosting actor, the app, is a little more complicated setup. There is the long-term idea of allowing organizations to, especially NGOs, to have a branded version of the actor app, but currently the UI is not fully set up to be nicely and easily to do that. We don't have a client that or organization that wants to do that. If we had, we might have different priorities and figure that out. Right now, you would need our keys and that kind of stuff. Of course, you cannot build that yourself. That is all the primarily technical questions I have received prior. Even if things come up later and you have technical questions, please don't hesitate, please shout. Otherwise, I will move over to the actor plans. One reason I moved that afterwards is so that I can explain the actual reasoning behind this. So is the web client planned? Yes. If by planned you mean we want that. If by planned you mean we have a roadmap when that's going to happen, then no. Of course we want a web client. The problem is that the way that Dart, so the Flutter API UI, and Rust communicate with one another is through something called the foreign function interface, which is a C standard from the 1970s. And that doesn't fly that well. We're able to work with that, and this is by how most applications in the world that are two completely different languages intersect and can call functions on another, but it doesn't exist in the web world of things. In the web world of things, we have something now called web workers, which are background processes, as well as WebAssembly, which is a lower level implementation that is much more performant. And more modern clients are using WebAssembly to do the encryption and state management and these kind of things that are heavy, and then use JavaScript in the front end. Flutter itself provides features to build these clients and even use the WebAssembly part. However, getting Rust and then the intermediate layer, the FFI, to work nicely is pretty tough, and right now doesn't work. We have not focused on that. We have not tried to make that happen yet. I'm pretty sure we can, but the existing tooling and the existing libraries do not work. One reason for that is that the way that these systems manage memory is very different. In the WebAssembly world, you have to copy everything over, which is a lot less efficient than what you can do with Rust in general, where Rust can write something into memory and then say Flutter, hey, you can read it here. For example, for images and that kind of stuff, that is a lot more efficient than if you then copy that over into a different process, part of the process, so just that the UI can read it. And so we have some major hurdles before we can get that to work. Probably a couple of weeks or months of work. Overall, we do want that. I think it's very important for the self-hosting idea of things that you can always do that from any internet cafe in the world, at least in theory, because end-to-end encryption on these kind of scenarios is complicated. Kiosk mode is a problematic thing. But in general, you should be able to send these messages. When that's going to happen, though, is currently unclear. We're hoping it depends on also like what kind of other people are joining over the next half a year. Maybe we will start with something like this. Maybe it's going to be next year. At any point, will you make Actor Global or an open source project? So the project itself is under the public source license, the Actor public source license, which is an eventually open source license. So whatever is public today, a year from now, is under the Affero GNU public license 3.0. So you can use whatever's available today, a year later, and just reuse it under the AGPL, which means if you do changes, you have to also give these changes to whoever is using the app. That also is a part of the hosting process. The reason why we're not publishing everything as full open source from the get-go is a little bit complicated, but I'd like to explain that because I think it's important to understand. So we're hosting it under a license that allows you to use it yourself for up to 100 people, host this for your closed system. So it's not public, it's just your hackerspace or whatever. Go ahead, use it. The source is all public. You can read all of the source. It is on GitHub. All of the libraries, all of the lower hanging stuff, so the Rust stuff, that is all open source licenses. However, the highest layer, the actual bundling of the application is not. The reason for that is that we have seen a problematic trend in open source over the last couple of years, where if you do that for libraries, if you do that for frameworks that are mostly for servers, it's all fine. It works well. You need that for a large community to work. If your goal is to have many users on a platform-like system, like we have, if the entity, in this case Actor, that is building the product and is therefore also selling services and other stuff around that, is usually using that money to cross-pollinate its building process, the actual production process. However, if that entity then has to compete with other entities that just take the thing and sell it, they are offering it for cheaper. And as a result, especially in government and all kinds of public contracts, you have to take the cheaper option, right? So they will be picked. They don't necessarily care that that means less money is going to the actual product, though, to the actual project. And that cannibalizes the actual overall entity. We've seen that happening with a few projects, and this is why we're currently, but we're in heated discussion about that internally as well. This is why we're currently having a very liberal, you use it yourself, we don't care, as long as you don't offer that as something else. You can just use it, kind of license. And if you want to build something on top of that, that the organization, we are an association, so it's a membership organized entity, and we're planning on extending who can be a participant, a member of this organization. Can steer where this is going. One idea to provide a wide set of still organizations that offer services around this is to allow that, for example, for member organizations, that they can do that, because they're contributing back to the project. So it's not hurting the project overall if they are doing that. That is another part of why Matrix is so useful for us, because it gives the opportunity to have many servers, right? And you can't just use any server. So even with our restrictive license, in some sense, you can still host everything that is needed for using Actor, and you can just use the official app and just use your server, right? We can't stop you, and we won't stop you. However, if you wanted to use exactly what we're working on and just rebrand it and sell it as your own, that's something we don't think we want to have. Aside from the fact that I will keep repeating that until I'm dead, I think I don't want Nazis to use my stuff. I don't think the liberal idea of the way that open source freedom is defined is a particularly good one. I have a different definition of freedom, and that includes that my work is not being used to harm me or others, and that doesn't fly with me. I don't want to give away that control. But we're welcome, Sam. That's what the AMA is for. Are there any other questions on our plans or the tech at this point that I should go to? Because now, like, if you don't have any other questions, it's going to become like super out there, abstract, not actor related anymore at all.
I have I have a
Go
question because yesterday I meet with Mellemfolk Action Aid, and also Bo Klink is here representing their IT department, if you can say that. And one of the things we discussed in the meeting was regarding also offline capabilities, and you know, especially considering Global South organizations. And I know, like, this is not something that is sort of like happening this year, or kind of like a part of the alpha release indefinite, but sort of like maybe just talk a bit about like what could be some of the ways that that, you know, when we eventually start to kind of implement some of these things, or already now, like what are some of the things that at least kind of consider either low bandwidth or limited access to the internet. So overall, I guess the question is regarding accessibility. Yeah.
Yes, so I would refrain from the word accessibility, because in the tech concept it means something very specific, which is the ability for not fully able-bodied people to use your application, which is not the same as the rest of your question was. So the question was more about like how about locations where you don't have constant access to the internet. And if you've looked into the Effectio white paper that we've published end of last year, you know, this is a big concern to us. One thing that we see happening over and over again is that protests are being struck down by repressive regimes and governments all over the world by disabling internet, right? And the reliance on having these decentralized servers, even in a federated system, we have these servers that you need to connect to, is a vulnerability for these people. Not for the fact that it can be exploited against them, but then they can't organize anymore. That's a very annoying artifact of the current state of the system. One nice thing about the Federation protocol is that even if the government strikes down one server, which is something they could, for example, do in most of European countries, like there's legal procedures to strike down specific servers, it's pretty simple and easy to spin up another. And ideally, you already had more than one legal entity being in charge of that. That makes it a lot more complicated for organizations to do something against that. So you run into a whack-a-mole situation. However, if you run into an actual connectivity situation, the system is currently not that strong. I opened a website here which is called Are We P2P Yet, which means peer-to-peer. And that is the research project also primarily pushed by Element to do peer-to-peer connections using Matrix, which essentially means that what is currently the home server, that thing that you connect to, moves into your device. And the other thing that it currently relies on, which is DNS, so domain names, gets replaced with public key cryptography. Jesus, which you might know of from the crypto world, from blockchain world, where basically you can generate a key and then have a public equivalent to that locally for you that is possible to use to authenticate, but also encrypt stuff with. And we're very excited about what's happening here. Because we're just relying on the protocol on a top level, and we're not assuming domains either. Once that is in a state that we can think about using it, that should be something to be able to use it. There was also a presentation, I think it was for FASTM, where Matthew, so one of the chairman of the Metrics Foundation and CEO of the Element company, showcased this application within a Bluetooth only network. So you can start using and thinking about doing that in mesh network environments. However, once you move away from DNS and you say like, okay, what if you're in a protest like it has happened in Hong Kong, where then the government is shutting down the internet around you, but you have these devices that are capable of creating a mesh network. How do you engage trust in that? How do you make sure that messages are actually spread properly? How do you make sure that no one is sending spam attacks? There's a bunch of stuff we don't know how to deal with yet. So our current plan is to get a first working version ready, and then we are looking into peer-to-peer. Once we talk about peer-to-peer, we can also talk about offline-ish support, because it's a federated network, so that assumes already that servers don't have a constant connection to one another. There's already processes in place so that one server, if it figures out how we have diverging history of messages, there's a way to merge that. So that is already all provided, and that's where it makes it really easy from a conceptual point of view to add peer-to-peer. But from a product perspective, it's going to be a lot more to think about in terms of what we also need to teach people and educate around in terms of what is currently happening, what is the status, how do you fend off attackers, that sort of things. If you're very curious about this, I recommend you look at this page. We are hoping to also engage in this research coming early next year. Let's make this happen. That's all I can say so far on the purely technical basis, though. Look, there's a lot of green check marks here, so state is already pretty good. Ooh, there's red stuff. Red stuff is bad. Yeah. So if you're curious about these problems, they're complicated.
Well, for me,
So you were saying?
yeah. It's I just wanted to say that it's really, that would be really a great thing to have, because it would really bring a lot of people a lot of security they don't have at the moment worldwide. And we know that shutdowns of the internet are like growing crazy. They're going crazy like all over the world. And this is not just the case somewhere, like in China, Pakistan as well, but in like certain situations in Europe, they do the same. They shut down the internet, the police or the authorities. And so that's really needed, I guess. And related to that, I have a question. There's a big discussion going on in the EU at the moment about encrypted messaging, and the authorities want to have basically access, or they will, I don't know, somehow forbid encrypted messaging. So what is the active position on that? I mean, it seems at the moment, it seems quite likely that it could happen. So it could happen soon. So there's like, for instance, the Signal president, Meredith, she's talking a lot about that. Yeah, and I think we should have a point on that as well, an opinion, or like is that technically something we can do about, like, here you have a bit of access, but not that access
No.
Like all the access or
So the opinion is very clear. If you allow them some form of decryption key for the governments to have, then you can steal that key, and therefore this system itself is vulnerable. That is, we know that is true for the TSA as well, like the American authority that is allowed to open suitcases that are locked up, right? That it has these TSA and then these numbers on that. A couple of years ago, someone was stupid enough to take a picture just like on themselves in social media, and it had the keys shown in the background. Therefore, all keys are effectively leaked. TSA keys are not secure. That is even clearer with digital information, because you wouldn't even know that it has been copied. There's no way to allow some keys access and not others, and ensure their moral or legal point on a technical basis. You can't do that. That's outside of technical
okay.
terms.
So encryption is on or off, right?
Encryption, yeah, basically. I mean, you
Yeah.
you can say there's some other keys, and so there used to be encryption protocols that were pushed by the CIA a couple of years back. There was in the 90s, I think, and they essentially knew about a vulnerability that allowed them to crack it, right? So it was used for a while, and then it was figured out, hey, they know how to crack this. But if you didn't know that this was the case, then you wouldn't be able to crack it either. But yes, technically, like we can't offer end-to-end encryption that then someone else can open. That is impossible to do both. Then it's not
Right.
end-to-end encrypted. That's its definition cycle.
Yeah.
Talking about this, the currently upcoming legislation. So there's two important parts to this. One of them is the UK version of that, and the other one is the European version of that. The UK version of that is very terrible. That is the one that Meredith and others are talking about, like actively retracting from the market for, which is also what WhatsApp and others are supposed to be doing, which is effectively breaking encryption totally by then taking the content received by the client and sending it to a centralized server that is analyzing the content for maliciousness, which is effectively, then you don't need to enter an encryption. Then you can just turn it off and do it on the server. There's no point in then sending the message somewhere, right? Once it's decrypted. It's supposed to be only on images, and it's supposed to be only on for finding messages that show child pornography. That is usually the claim, but it's bullshit. First off, because the legislation doesn't restrict to that, and then research has shown that even within that system, you can train algorithms to also find other things that are not obvious, and therefore, like, cut that off. They claim these systems have a failure rate of less than 0.1%. But if you just imagine the amount of messages that, I don't know, WhatsApp is handling, that's a few thousand, if not tens of thousands of faulty messages, faulty flags that are sent automatically, also within the European legislation, to the police of messages of just private citizens. But the problem here is similar to what we've seen in other earlier scenarios when fighting against end-to-end encryption. That time it was terrorism. The actual claim that this would help against XYZ is not substantiated. There is no reason to believe that people use that, because right now there's been a very famous research by Correctiv in Germany, together with others. The legal system doesn't even use everything they can legally do to prevent child pornography. They are mostly sharing links in darknet forums, but these links are on legal servers. And if you just go to the server and say, hey, you have some illegal content here, they usually within hours remove that content. And we know police has these lists, but they're not using that. They pretend that they want to use that as honey traps, but effectively they're not removing the content that they have the legal authority to do. And that is a much bigger issue than image messages sent over WhatsApp. So the claim itself is already bogus. The tools they're trying to do that with are, even if you accept the premise that this is a problem that needs to be solved on the system, are questionable. And in the main reason I don't care is that both of these legislations talk about the entities in terms of like WhatsApp or Facebook or something like that. So they're counting the total number of users. And if you have a fundamentally and wide enough distributed system, like, have you ever wondered why they're not asking for the same for email? Because it's impossible to control. If Gmail was forced to do that, everybody just moves off Gmail. They have capped that system to have, like, I think 60 million monthly users or something. So a pretty large number. So it only effectively, I don't know, 10 or 15 companies in the world that are affected by this legislation. But if you just simply made that a federated system, like with email, you would make it impossible to enforce that, because there's so many people offering an email server. It's just stupid even to try to do that. And email isn't even encrypted, right? It's even easier to offer that on email than it would be on an end-to-end encrypted system. So if they're doing that to WhatsApp, people will just continue emailing to one another. So it's a completely pointless effort. Yeah, I'm going to close the peer-to-peer. That's going to be even more stringent once P2P is there. We also, because we're just a client, this legislation is not made for the decentralized and multi-client concept, right? It is only more or less applicable for organizations that have control over both, which we don't. We could be forced as a client to adhere to this if they would make the claim that that overall we would have 60 million users, which would be interesting, because I think the latest number is like 1 million monthly active, and then like 50 or 30 million total registered users. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's like below that. But even then, we are not a client that has that many users, and we won't be for a while. But my point at that point would be, okay, then we should definitely make sure that whoever is publishing that is sitting in Switzerland, rather than the European Union, which isn't that hard to make. Software development is really easy to move in terms of who's publishing it. So.
Of course. Thank you. I completely agree.
Any other questions? There's a very interesting set of questions. I'm very happy we're having the AMA, but I was expecting also for more simple questions. If, like, you cannot really all be understanding all of this conceptually, do you? I don't believe you. You're lying.
I have to jump into another meeting, unfortunately, but thanks so much, Ben, for all the great insights, and for non-techie like me to understand a bit better. It's really great. So thanks all for showing up. Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming by, Emil. Well, if you don't have any other specific questions, then we go into the more tech-related-ish questions.
I also have to leave, and thanks for your time. It was
Oh,
great.
you're welcome. Like you liked it. So there's a one question. Can we see the potential of Rustlang to be able to get used in the kernel development in the near future? So the background here is that the Linux kernel, so the core that is making the operating system for Linux, is written in C. And it has been C for, well, since it's been mentioned in 1992. Well, there's also some assembly, but assembler, but that doesn't really matter. And I think already 2 years ago now, it was proposed to also have an API that allows to implement stuff in Rust instead, which has similar benefits as mentioned before. Like it's easier to develop, and it has higher primitives, so it makes it easier to construct things and not think about every move of memory you're making and that kind of stuff, while also being safer. I am honestly, to answer this question, I have no idea. I'm too far off the other end of the spectrum, which is really high level, user level usage of the application, to know what's going on. I know it was very controversial, but everything in the Linux kernel is always controversial. They really like to make a mess out of things. I don't think we are a particular reasonable example because we're very high up on the other side of things. We'll see if that is something that picks up. I would assume, because we've seen people implementing drivers and similar stuff in Rust a lot over the last couple of years, because it makes it easier for them as well to develop stuff in there, that this will pick up, at least in terms of more not open source drivers. But I guess we have to wait and see. I'm not totally on top of these kind of things. Then we have one question that is about the privacy aspects. So we take privacy very seriously. We also disable all types of tracking on our stuff that we send out. And the question is, what is the optimal strategy of improving lead generation? So figuring out who wants to be contacted, while also addressing concerns about customer privacy. So my take on this is, I don't want customers, I want community members. I want people that we interact with and that I also consider like not someone or something to extract money of, but somebody who uses that service to provide more value, either by themselves or to third parties. Therefore, the lead generation that is mostly happening over the last couple of years based on tracking practices and surveillance, I think most of them are of the classic, like super classic advertising idea of repetitively talking someone into believing something. I'm a much stronger defender of the idea behind projects like Basecamp, where we say, like, we have our niche, we have our projects and our stuff. If that is not for you, that is okay too. I don't need to sell this to everyone. If you do not need this thing, if you do not need these services, that is fine. And when we talk about lead generation, we can still offer from the website that they get in contact with us through support forms and other things, without having to know that they've already been here 4 times and that we therefore need to change the wording slightly to convince them. I don't think that is a particularly useful practice in the first place. That is only worth it because there's so much traffic on the internet that raising from 0.1 to 0.2 is massive and worth the amount of money that you can put into that. But I'm very much in favor of most of the cutting of this surveillance that has been happening, that we've seen in the last years. I'm not so much a fan of all of these cookie messages. I think no one is. And technically, you don't have to do them. You can also just not turn them on by default and only have the user opt in. But then, of course, no one's going to opt in. So I don't know. I'm not particularly concerned about that. We have seen many organizations over the years just use word to mouth, build a good product, and have people talk about it. WhatsApp didn't have advertising even until long after they've been bought by Facebook, now Meta. sriracha sauce, one of the most famous sauces in the world, never paid in advertising at all, ever. They have still the same 10 sales reps they had like when they started. I don't think that's a particular useful way of doing things. There was one more, I think. Yeah, that's the one where I'm like, whoo, this is very much out there, the next two, and I'm not exactly sure if I understand them correctly. So what are your thoughts on learning and development with technology and product companies? How can we ensure absorption of technology and knowledge at optimal level, both for customers and employees? I think I'm understanding, how do you get people to use your software? There's various interesting strategies. One of the things that I think of the most about adoption in general, and change management within companies as well, is this very famous curve, which is basically a bell curve of the distribution of different types of people and their approach to new things. So there's one group, like a very small group of people who are just, they want everything, always the newest, always the best. And then you have what is called the early adopters, which is a group of people who are willing to pay a little more to have a DVD player before everyone else has a DVD player. So they are willing to like take our alpha product and see through all of the bugs and instabilities that it will have, and see, okay, that's its potential. That's what you can do with this, and already start supporting it. And basically, you want this group of people that's very famous in a lot of tech projects. You want these people to love what you're doing, and keep them up to date and keep them informed and keep them in the loop, because they will notice, they will recognize when a problem comes around that this thing is perfect for, and then get other people to move on. Then you have this group of, which is like to the center of the bell curve, which is the latecomers, or which is like the average. They will not use something if they don't know about other people using it, but they will be using it if they see a use in it. So they're not going to be the first, but if you have early adopters and they are vocal about it and they tell these people to use it, they will start using it to a certain degree. And then you have the late comers. They will only do it when everyone else is basically already doing it. So at least their perception is like everyone else is doing it. And then you have the ones that will never adopt anything. But these early adopters are the key group of people, and that's also the part of the process where you need to listen very closely and carefully about things that work, things that don't work, or assumptions that you've made that are wrong, as well as paradigms and patterns that you've or you want to implement with your product that might not make it through them. They don't understand what you want from them, because if they don't understand, no one else will. Like, they are super willing to like go over typos, go over a lot of sticks and stones to use the cool new thing. And if they don't get it, no one else will get it. That is also the same for within companies. We've seen that this curve basically plays out more or less, depends a little bit on the country. If you have more risk takers, less risk takers, these kind of phenomenons. But overall, we have this bell curve, and this is the most useful pattern for technology to be adopted for a mass market, which we sort of go for. Although finding this group of early adopters within NGOs is tough, because it's not the most common place for early adopters to be around. But it's generally also the purpose, the position that Matrix is taking is very often they are introduced by the guy in the basement who's doing the IT of the entire organization, because someone higher up said, like, we need this and that, and they're like, hey, you should talk to these guys. And that is an enthusiastic early adopter that is then bringing it to the table that wouldn't be otherwise in the part of the discussion at all. That is a little more tough in NGOs, which are pretty hesitant to adapt new technologies, but they also feel the pressure. They also feel the need, And I think this is a good place for us. I'm not sure if the person who wrote this is in here. I hope I answered that question thoroughly enough for you. If you want to make another follow-up or explain more context, please do so. And then we go very general. If you have to run a company based on primarily 3 things, what would be those and why? That's super open and out there. I interpret it as what are the core ideas and values, and I think experimentation and willingness to push the limits, especially from the engineer perspective, is what we do and what we will be doing. And people who are excited about that. Then honesty internally and externally. There's which comes with authenticity, I guess. Under the same basic mindset, and then caring about one another, caring about like on a human level that we are all cool, and that's not that we're not extracting too much from one another, or that everyone is internally is doing well, but also externally, like the people we built this for. We want to make sure that what we provide there is not stressing to them, is not forcing them to do things that they don't want to do. So I think primarily 3 things here as values that I would build upon. Jesus, what a philosophical. Well, I guess end if no one else has any other questions coming up.
Thank you, Ben. It was great to hear all that.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, you
You're
shared
very
a great
welcome.
explanation on things, and yeah, it was a pretty exciting session. I really learned on things which I didn't know earlier.
Oh, that's great.
Thank you.
Well, then I only have a few things to say. So I also want to thank Korrektur nach oben, who's managing this session and recording this. If you have other questions, of course, you can always follow up and send it to me via any of these known ways to contact me. If you don't know how to contact me, you'll find that on unicorn.org. Unicorn.org. There's a bunch of things down here. And you can always contact me through that and ask more questions. And in that case, I will say thank you very much and have a good rest of the day.
See you. Bye.
You too. Thanks, Ben.
You're welcome.
Alright, ich beende jetzt mal die Aufnahme.